You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
Hello, Miami Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
A very good hello to the people. Thank you for being here today, Brain. It's the offseason. We're fully into the offseason. The Super Bowl matchup is set. Brain, any thoughts on Chiefs versus Eagles part 2?
Not really. I mean, I guess normally what I would do in a situation like this is I would try to cheer for the team that hasn't won a Super Bowl. But I mean, even though the Eagles didn't win the last matchup between the Chiefs, they're not that far removed from winning a Super Bowl. What are they, like 8 years ago they won a Super Bowl?
Yeah, something like that. That wasn't that long ago.
I mean, I think it'd be cool to see the Chiefs make history. But I also think it would be cool to see the Chiefs lose. So I guess I really don't care. I just hope it's a good game.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, now that it's not the Bills, I don't care. I don't care. Legitimately do not care what happens in the Super Bowl. Would it be cool to watch the Chiefs win? Yeah, sure. That'd be great to see them make history, because it's not the New England Patriots. And I'm not this, I'm not blinded by the cynicism of my youth. I think it's kind of cool to sit back here and watch a team completely dominate. Especially because my team is not really in that same tier. We're not there with them. So it's not like if I was a Bills fan, I would totally get being sick to your stomach watching the Chiefs do this again. If I was a Ravens fan, I'd be sick to death of watching the Chiefs do this. But as a Dolphin fan, knowing that my team isn't on that level, we aspire to be on that level, but we're not there. I can just sit here and I can appreciate the fact that they're doing this, and what they're doing is incredible. And we've got one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, if not the greatest quarterback of all time, in Patrick Mahomes, doing incredible things. I can just sit back and enjoy it for what it is. But like I said, the Bills aren't involved. So if the Eagles win, I've got friends who are Eagles fans. I would be more than happy to see the Eagles win. I'd be thrilled for Saquon Barkley to get that big win. So I think it's it's just fun. And like I said, I'm just happy that I'll be able to sit back and enjoy the Super Bowl without any stress of having to worry about the Buffalo Bills. So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, I pretty much echo that.
Because the Super Bowl isn't for another week, we're not going to really talk about that today. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to open up the mailbag. We've got a bunch of questions from different folks that we are going to share with you here. And in fact, if you would like to ask us questions in the future, then you should become a member of Dolphins Talk Extra, because almost all of the questions that we've got for you today are from Dolphins Talk Extra subscribers. If you are interested in becoming a Dolphins Talk Extra subscriber, go to patreon.com/DolphinsTalk for as little as $3 a month, and you'll get access to bonus shows about the Miami Dolphins, about things beyond the Miami Dolphins. We might not get to all of our questions today on the main Same Old Dolphin Show. We're going to do a bonus segment right after this, exclusively for Dolphins Talk Extra subscribers, where we'll answer any of the leftover questions. We might even get to some other questions and have some other conversation as well. So we'll have bonus segments like that. Aaron and Mike have a reality TV show. Mike's talking pro wrestling over there. We're also going to be, as the offseason goes on and Dolphins news starts to slow down, our show is going to shift to being basically exclusively for Dolphins Talk Extra subscribers. We'll be doing Dolphins Talk classic Dolphin game watch-alongs, and we'll watch them back. We'll have reaction shows. We'll have all kinds of stuff. We're also going to have some exclusive draft content coming your way on Dolphins Talk Extra. So head on over, patreon.com/Dolphins Talk for as little as $3 a month. So today we are going to dig into the mailbag and answer those questions. But before we do that, a reminder to everybody, if you're watching live on the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel, take a moment right now, smash the thumbs up button below, subscribe to the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. We appreciate that very much. If you're watching on the I Am a Miami Dolphin Fan Facebook page, a shout out to you as well. Smash the like button on this video if you will. And then head on over to DolphinsTalk.com. It is your one-stop shop for all things Miami Dolphins. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Same Old Dolphin Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you are so inclined, follow us on Blue Sky, at Amplified to Rock, at Aaron the Brain, and at Same Old Dolphins. All right, we're going to open up the mailbag, but first, we are going to hear a word from our sponsor.
The DolphinsTalk.com podcast network is sponsored by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive, Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship it to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com. Caneswear.com.
All right, so let's dive right into it, Brain. We're going to start with a question that we got from Intense Farmer on Patreon. And he asked, what do you guys think about moving Achane to wide receiver? Guy had better hands than most of the wide receiver room last year and might free up more reps for Wright. Speaking of Jaylen Wright there, Brain. So what do you think about this idea of moving Achane to wide receiver?
I mean, I don't think you have to move him to wide receiver for him to get wide receiver reps, because he was also your most efficient running back too. That said, if you're moving on from Mostert and you're moving on from Jeff Wilson Jr., there's going to be a role for Jaylen Wright regardless. It's not like Devon A. We've seen what Devon Achane looks like when he's getting, upwards of 20 carries a game. His efficiency goes down. So there's got to be some balance there. It's got to be a little bit of a running back by committee. But because Devon Achane is so dynamic in the passing game, that means that he can still play more snaps by getting reps also in the slot or wide or wherever they want to play him. That doesn't make him a wide receiver, but he's an offensive weapon at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we saw a bit of this year. We definitely heard a lot about it in training camp, that he was seeing some snaps at wide receiver. They were putting him in the slot. They were using him there. I think that's something that we're going to see more of as it goes forward. Brent, this question from Intense Farmer actually leads to another question that we got on the Discord from Fish Pilot. And he says, what actually happened with Jaylen Wright this year? They traded up to get him and then basically benched him for the second half of the season. And he says it didn't make sense to do that, especially when they were running Wilson over him when the season was pretty clearly going nowhere, he says. So what is your take on the fact that the Dolphins seemed to have a reluctance to use Jaylen Wright more?
I think there are multiple factors to that. I don't know for certain, but I think there is a playbook element to this. The fact that Wright was not getting, you could clearly, I don't know exactly how it was skewed like later in the season, but I know for like the first half of the season, it was this crazy percentage where if Jaylen Wright was on the field, it was a running play and he was getting the carry. And so it got to the point where it's like, well, if Jaylen Wright's on the field, it's a running play. Well, then that takes away your element of surprise. That's no good. So I believe, I don't think we'll know for sure unless somebody comes out and says it, in retrospect in the future, looking back on it. But I think that there's probably a playbook element to it. He's a rookie. There could be a number of things that could be going on there. The other thing is that I don't think that they made this draft pick solely with the idea that Jaylen Wright was going to have a big impact this year. I thought they were open to it, but this was still a team that they clearly made an emphasis to have Achane be a huge part of the offense. And Raheem Mostert was still there and coming off of a season where he had 18 touchdowns the year before. And while Raheem Mostert had a stretch where he had some fumbling issues and he had a stretch where he was benched, largely he ran better in between the tackles than Jaylen Wright did. Jaylen Wright basically did a good job spelling Achane on outside zone runs, and that kind of became his role as the season wore on, was that if they're going to run inside, it was more likely than not going to be either Mostert or Jeff Wilson Jr. As far as running Jeff Wilson Jr. over Jaylen Wright when the season was over, the season wasn't over. The season wasn't over until the last week of the season. So I don't really, I get that it looked bleak, but the team wasn't viewing it that way. The team was viewing it as, we're trying to win games to make the playoffs. And until the last game of the season, they still had a shot at making the playoffs. So it's not like they were in tank mode and playing out the string.
And I also think it's clear that the way the Dolphins approached the draft in 2024, they were approaching the draft with the idea that none of the guys that they were drafting were going to need to be big-time contributors in year one. When you look at the way that they drafted, they did not want they did not plan for Chop Robinson to get the amount of run that he got in that season. But the Jalen Phillips injury and the fact that Bradley Chubb took longer to recover than expected resulted in
too.
But yeah. And then the Shaq Barrett retirement, all of those things combined to make it so that Chop Robinson is going to get a lot more run than we expected him to be. Patrick Paul was clearly drafted to be a guy that they were going to count on later, but they weren't expecting him to be an immediate contributor in day one. In year one, rather. Same thing goes for the receivers that they drafted in Malik Washington, Taj Washington, Jaylen Wright as well. I think they definitely drafted all of those guys with ideas that they were guys that if they needed to play them, that they could theoretically do that, but their goal was to bring those guys along and develop them. And the plan was never to make them, big parts of the plan going forward. And then, of course, as injuries became what they were, we saw that the plans had to change. I will say that I think the Dolphins are going to have a markedly different strategy entering the draft this year in how they approach things. And I think just because of the way things have shaken out, they're going to have to find some more immediate contributors. But be that as it may, I think that all of those guys that we saw that the Dolphins drafted not to be big contributors in year one ended up having a role to play in the team, and I think largely did pretty well. I think we wanted to see that. The fact that you wanted to see more of Wright speaks to how well he performed in the limited action that he got. So that's what I think about that situation. But talking about Brain, potentially, I sort of hinted at the draft being something that the Dolphins were going to have a different perspective this year. It leads to a question that we got also on Patreon from Jeffrey Johnston, who says, what are the odds that they are finally going to invest in the offensive line? I think we're okay at tackle, but I'm sick of our guards getting pushed around constantly and the running backs getting hit a yard deep. Brain. And this is going to, I think, also feed into another question that we're going to ask a little bit later on. But what do you think? Are they finally going to fully invest in the offensive line, and I mean not just at tackle, but at guard as well.
I do. I think that they're in a situation where at this point, like, they're being hit over the head with it. It's very obviously a need. I think they're going to invest at that position. Do I think that they're necessarily going to invest at guard in the first round of the draft? No, probably not. But if there's a tackle there that could play guard, or a guard that could play tackle, and that's like the best player on their board in the first round, that might be enticing. But I think this is something that they're going to invest in, both in the draft, in the first 2 days of the draft, and in free agency. So it's like, if you draft a guard in day 2, like say you draft a guard in the second round, that's a pretty high pick for a guard. That's like, your best guards generally get picked in round 2. And then you go out and you also sign a guy that's a starter. And then you bring somebody back and you have competition between veterans and that rookie at guard. And then whoever doesn't make it, that's your depth. I think that's a good plan. And I think that's the likely plan at this point.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of different possibilities. And I think it's one of the things that I'm really interested to see how it plays out in terms of free agency versus the draft. But there is a guy who some are speculating will be available and in reach for the Dolphins at number 13, who is like the absolute quintessential, like if you could draw up in a lab, like the premier first round pick for Chris Grier, it's this player who the Dolphins would pick at 13. And it's Josh Simmons, the tackle from Ohio State, who is by some people's estimation, the best tackle available in the draft, but is coming off of a pretty significant injury. And he suffered an injury, I think, to his knee in like mid-October. And so missed the rest of the season, but still decided to enter the draft anyway. So he's a guy coming off a knee injury, but premier talent. And because of the injury, probably going to be around for the Dolphins at 13. He's one of those guys, because I think you're looking at a situation where the Dolphins might load up at tackle and maybe look at shifting Austin Jackson inside. That's one of the possibilities. They may look for guys with more positional flexibility so that they can figure out what the best combination is. But yeah, I would be very surprised if the Dolphins didn't make some kind of significant effort to bolster that offensive line, Brian.
Yeah, and I will say this, as currently constituted, I don't necessarily feel okay at tackle. I think it's a room, it needs to be addressed. Now, if you're bringing Teron Armstead back, then that means Patrick Paul goes back to the bench, and then you've got, I guess, Keon Smith as your developmental guy, and you probably want to bring at least one other guy into that room to compete. But if you're not bringing Teron Armstead back, if he's retiring or you're moving on from him, then you're going to need a swing tackle and also a backup plan for Patrick Paul, because we have really no idea how Patrick Paul is going to take to being a starting left tackle for 17 games. And frankly, with Austin Jackson's injury history and this team's injury history, you're going to need a swing tackle regardless, because you're going to need somebody when one of those guys gets hurt.
100%. I know I said all the questions were coming from our Patreon, but we got a question in the chat from a longtime friend of the podcast, our good buddy, Brian Sachs, on the show. I think this might be a debut for the Sachs man. Thoughts about trading down to accumulate draft capital. Love you guys. I would say the only way it is acceptable, we've talked about this before on the show. Draft capital can be used in a number of ways. One, it can be used to draft premier talent. It can be used to trade for more draft picks, or it can be used to trade an outside player. The only acceptable reason for the Dolphins to trade down to accumulate draft picks is if there is some sort of larger, significant move that is going to bring in an immediate offensive line or an immediate contributor who can bolster the team. Because otherwise, this is a team that has so many holes coming into this offseason, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but there are so many things on this team that need to get addressed that I think the idea of trading back purely to accumulate capital is not really the play at this point in time for the Dolphins.
To me, it's on the table. It's just a matter of how the board falls, right? Like, if the board falls and the best players on the board are like edge rushers, wide receivers, if there's a quarterback on the board that people are falling in love with, and there's a team that wants to trade up, then I'm listening to offers. Now, the thing is you've got to have a target in mind, and you've got your draft board. So it's like if I'm sitting at 13, do I want to trade all the way back to like 25? No, I don't want to say. I mean, if I do that, I need to get
can't afford to do that.
Yeah, I need like a massive payback in that deal, and that's something that probably is not going to make sense. But if you're sitting at 13 and there's a team sitting at like 16, 17, and you've got guys on your draft board that, like you feel very confident that one of those guys is going to be there, and you could pick up like an extra day 2 pick, then yeah, absolutely. I'm all for it. It's just a matter of how the draft board falls. Last year, I would have been a fan of trading back the way that the board fell, because I thought the Dolphins could have used that. But also, you need a partner. And, at the end of the day, the Dolphins felt like Chop Robinson was the best player there. At this point, it looks like it was a pretty good pick. Stylistically, I don't know that it was necessarily the best pick, but they got themselves a really good player. And I think this year it's going to be, similar kind of math. You're going to see how the board falls. You're going to look at the top of your draft board. If we're down to like the last guy on our, like the guy that we want is there, then you pick him. If the guy that you want is not there and you've got a bunch of guys that are, evenly graded, then you're going to listen to offers and you're going to want to move down. You're going to be okay with moving down as many spots as you feel confident that you're still going to get one of the guys at your draft board.
Yeah, I would couch that answer with understanding that we're in a situation where Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier have very, very little margin for error this season. They got to get it right. And they got to get contributors, and they got to build a team. Like, the way things have gone, they can't afford to have a season that is just another part of a rebuild. This team has to, at least in the eyes of perhaps the owner, but definitely in the eyes of a lot of the fan base, this team has to be ready to compete and be among the best teams in the league this year. And if they're not there, then that's going to be a real problem for the head coach and the general manager. But moving on, another question from Patreon. This one comes from Bonnie Sedgwick. What do you think about moving Ramsey to safety and picking up a new cornerback in the draft or free agency?
Well, I think you have to draft a corner regardless. And I think you're going to pick somebody up in free agency regardless. That said, the thing with Ramsey is that if you put Ramsey, assuming that they don't keep Javon Holland, if you put Ramsey at safety, and maybe if you do keep Javon Holland, it doesn't matter. But if you put Ramsey at safety, he's going to be the best safety on the roster. But if you put Ramsey at cornerback, he's going to be the best cornerback on the roster. I don't care who you draft. Nobody's coming in as a rookie this year. I guess I could be wrong, but in all likelihood, nobody that you draft at 13 is going to come in as a rookie and be better than Jalen Ramsey day one at corner. So I think the answer there is I'm okay with them moving Ramsey around, but I'm not moving him predominantly to safety where I don't think he has as much impact because it's just not as It's not as impactful a position as corner is, and he plays it at a high level. I know he didn't have a great year this past year, and he had some moments where, he got beat and he lost some one-on-one matchups. But by and large, he still had a really good year. He's still a plus player and a plus cornerback. If you had a bunch of depth at corner and you had really good players, I would say, yeah, we can afford to move him to safety. But I don't think we have that luxury.
Right. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? That's like there's a lot of different, again, and it comes back to the idea that the Dolphins have so many positions of need that I don't think you can afford to move Jalen Ramsey to another corner. I think you can take advantage of the fact that Ramsey is a super flexible player and gives you that flexibility to do different things with him. But I don't think you can just say, well, we're going to put him at safety. We need to draft another cornerback, or say we're going to keep him at cornerback. We need to bring another. The Dolphins need to address both positions anyway. So I think you got to use Jalen Ramsey the best way that you can use Jalen Ramsey. And if that means sometimes putting him back there, then fine. But I don't think you can move him somewhere and say, this is where he's going to be. Let's address everything else. That's at least in terms of how I'm thinking about it. This is an overarching question here from Mr. McDolphin on Discord. He says, what do you think are the Dolphins' biggest needs? Rank them 1 to 5. And where do you think they should address these needs? Free agency and or the draft. Well, let me tell you. Okay. Let me give you one thing. I'm going to throw one thing out there because it's not something that they can address in free agency or the draft. One of the things that the Dolphins need this season is they need their head coach to be better. They need their head coach to be better. As an in-game manager, as a decision maker in the game, as a play caller, he needs to be better. And we've talked at length about this all season long. His habits, his inability to make challenges, his seeming inability to commit to the run sometimes, his need to always outsmart the other team. He just needs to be better on a game-by-game basis. He needs to be better at prepping his team. He needs to be better at the discipline. He needs to be better at the admin. He needs to be better at all of the sort of CEO parts of running the football team. The head coach needs to be better. And the only person that can fix that is Mike McDaniel. From what I've seen through 3 years of Mike McDaniel, I don't know that he is able to look at his own performance and evaluate it correctly. The other problem with the problem of the Miami Dolphins is that I don't know that there is an adult in the room that will sit down and force him to take an objective look at his own performance. And that's its own problem that is not going to get fixed. So the big thing is that the coach needs to find a way to be better. For me, I don't know if that's the biggest need, but I would certainly put it in the top 5 needs that the Dolphins have this season. But I think the spirit of the question is probably more along positionally, where are the areas that the Dolphins need to build. But the way that words have meaning, and the question was, what do you think is the Dolphins' biggest needs? And one of the Dolphins' biggest needs is for Mike McDaniel to be better.
Fair. So did you want to rank these positionally, or did you want me to, or who wanted to go?
Well, let's talk about them. So let's go through it. So obviously the interior offensive line.
Well, we got to rank them, right? So, I mean.
Well, let's name them first.
All right. Interior offensive line, cornerback, safety.
Safety, that's 3.
Middle linebacker,
that's 4.
Wide receiver.
Okay, wide receiver. I'd say interior defensive line.
Yeah, okay. Interior defensive line, backup quarterback.
Yeah. So we're
edge,
at more than 5.
I guess edge rusher, depending on what they do with Bradley Chubb and the health of Jalen Phillips.
Yeah. So let's pick 5 and rank them. What's the biggest? What's the biggest need?
For me, it's interior offensive line.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so guard. You need 2 of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to. I would say the offensive line in general is number one, because not only do you need at least 2 guards, you need at least probably 2 more tackles as well.
Well, I would say you need at least 1 more tackle. Depends. I mean, because like you don't want to go in banking on Keon Smith or anything, but like,
no,
if you've got some positional flexibility, like, I mean, when you're talking about the 4th tackle on the roster, like, I don't know if it's a huge need. If you do bring back Teron Armstead, but if you don't bring back, but I would say guard for sure.
Yep.
I would say the number 2 need is corner, because, if you're not bringing back Kendall Fuller, then like your second corner situation right now is Kader Kohu and Cam Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And your best corner, who we just talked about, we could potentially move to safety, is also getting up there in age. So you need to draft a corner.
Yeah. Let's not forget the Dolphins have had draft picks in that room, and of the draft picks that they've made in the defensive backfield, the best one now plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Did we not say safety? Because Fish Pilot is that. I thought we said safety, but if we didn't,
you said safety. We haven't ranked it. So far 1 is offensive line, 2 is cornerback for you.
Yeah, and 3 is safety.
Okay. Why don't we make 2 defensive backs?
Okay.
Can we do that?
We could do that.
1 is offensive line, 2 is defensive backs. What about, because we do need safeties, and like the one safety that this team drafted, or the one defensive back that this team has drafted that has actually come good, it now plays for the Steelers.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say that Noah Igbenogany has come good, but he plays for the Commanders now.
I don't know that
he was a disaster.
I don't know that he's necessarily come good, and if he has, it's taken 5 years.
In the NFC Championship game, good for him.
Well, doesn't necessarily mean that he's good.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got offensive line, we've got secondary. What's next?
To me, it's a toss-up between interior defensive line and middle linebacker. In importance, I would say it's interior defensive line. I guess it depends what happens with Calais Campbell on the here and now. I mean, in the long term, you need to address that position anyway, because you can't be counting on Calais Campbell long term, and you want to have some depth behind him also, behind him and Sealer. But I also really feel like this team has sorely needed a middle linebacker that is an impactful player for a really long time. So I'm to me, it's a toss-up between those 2 positions.
Yeah. Okay. So you're putting either defensive tackle, linebacker, middle linebacker, some combination thereof at 3 and 4. I'm going to put in, because I'm not going to let this go down to 5. I'm going to put this, well, I mean, maybe that's where we're at now, but backup quarterback is the other position that this team needs to invest in. They have to. We are now at a spot where this team has to, every year until it happens, find the guy who's going to be your future quarterback. Because, you got to bring somebody else in with eyes on him becoming the guy. Because as we've said on this show before, Tua can't be trusted to be the guy. He's going to get hurt. He's going to miss time. You got to bring somebody else in. Whatever it is, the Dolphins got to keep drafting. And I mean, and here's the thing. You draft a quarterback, you bring him in. You can't settle for Skylar Thompson and be like, well, we're feeling good about that. We're not going to bring somebody else in next year. No, you continue to bring players in until you finally have somebody, or until the quarterback that you have right now is your starting quarterback shows you that he is in fact capable of consistently going out there and playing good football every week and staying healthy. That's not something that he's been able to do only one time in his career. And otherwise he's missing 4.5 games a season. It's no good. You can't do that. You got to invest in the backup quarterback. I think that's somebody you should look at a draft pick or seeing if you can get one of those higher upside retreads, but the younger guys, the like I would say a Sam Darnold of the world, but you're not going to pay for Sam Darnold, but those like a Trey Lance or somebody in that realm. I mean, somebody like that. I mean, a Zach Wilson, I wouldn't even be mad about something like that as your backup quarterback, a Mac Jones, somebody like that who was drafted highly in this league, so theoretically has that high ceiling. To bring somebody like that in, otherwise, you got to draft somebody. You got to take a shot on a what's the guy from Ole Miss, Dart. You got to bring him in. You got to bring in a Kyle McCord late from Syracuse. You got to bring in one of those guys, and let's see if it hits, because it's got to be a kind of a late round dart throw at QB, but you have to invest in that position.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we should go into next season with 3 quarterbacks. I think if they wanted to bring Huntley back to compete for the number 2 spot, and they wanted to go and bring in a guy like one of the guys that you mentioned, like a Trey Lance or a Zach Wilson or whoever it is. Yeah, I'm cool with that. A Daniel Jones, like I'm super cool with that. And the expectation would be that whoever they bring in is going to be the number 2. Now the tricky part about that is that if you bring in to most of those guys, you're going to probably commit like $6 to $8 million on a deal to bring in as your backup quarterback. If they end up getting beat by Snoop Huntley, then you might end up cutting them. And so like you might want to draft a guy late as well and go into camp with 4 quarterbacks that have a conceivable chance of making the roster, so that if you have a guy that ends up that you paid some decent money to, but there's not a whole lot of guaranteed money, and you need to cut him, you can still cut him and still have 3 quarterbacks. And that 4th guy that you drafted, maybe you can stash him on the practice squad. Yeah,
well, I mean, whatever needs to happen,
if you need
you got to make that investment. So, all right, let's shift. We got another question here. This is a fun question. Still Dolphins related, from our good friend Somerset Tim over on Blue Sky. You guys going to Spain to see the Dolphins? And have you been to a London game yet? Brain, are you going? Any plans to go to España to see Los Miami Dolphins this year?
No. What I would say is if I was going to Spain, I would definitely take my wife, and it'd be a very, very hard sell for me to sell her the idea that we're going to go to Spain and we're going to waste a day watching the Dolphins. I know that's, maybe not a waste for most people, but I don't think that I could sell that. If I was going to Spain, I don't think I'd be going to see the Dolphins.
I mean, yeah, that's fair enough.
This is coming from somebody who's never been to Europe. So it's not like this is something that we can do, on a whim. If I've been to Europe a bunch of times, then I'd be like, oh yeah, let's go to Spain to see the Dolphins. No big deal.
Yeah.
But, if I'm going to go to Spain, it's going to be probably like a once in a lifetime kind of thing. Probably not going to spend the time there going to a Dolphins game.
Yeah. And if I'm going to go to Europe, I'm going to go see some real football. If I'm going to Europe, if I'm going to go to Spain, I want to go see Real Madrid. I want to go see Barcelona. I could go see the Dolphins anytime I want. I could go to Buffalo. I could go to the Meadowlands. I could go to see the Dolphins. If I'm going to be in Spain, I'm going to the Bernabeu. I'm going to the Camp Nou. I'm going, if I'm in, I haven't been to,
that's where they're playing, right?
London for a game either. But if I'm in London, I'm going to Wembley. I'm going to Tottenham Stadium. I'm going to, place like that. If I'm England, I'm going to Old Trafford. Let's be honest. I'm going to see United. But Yeah, I'm not going to. I don't feel the need to go to Europe to see the Dolphins when I can see them just fine in the Meadowlands, and it would cost me a fraction of what it would cost to go overseas. Brain, here's a great question, a fantastic question from Wida on Discord. Everyone at this point is expecting the same old Dolphins from Miami next year. What would they have to do to convince you that they are not going to be the same old Dolphins? And here's the thing. I think I should preface this by saying that I think you're right that everybody is expecting them to be the same old Dolphins right now. But in about 2 months, everybody's going to be fired up about, the Dolphins will have made some draft picks, and they will have, maybe 2.5, 3 months, they're going to be fired up. That the Dolphins team will be coming together. The roster will be taking shape. They will have signed free agents. People will begin to drink the Kool-Aid, and there will be people who are telling you the Dolphins are going 13-4. They're going to win the AFC East. I'm going to answer this first, Brain, by saying that what the Dolphins could do to convince me that they're not going to be the same old Dolphins would be going on the road in November of the 2025 season and beating a legitimate contender. That would convince me that they're not going to be the same old Dolphins.
Yeah, exactly. So that, to me, this question reads as what can the Dolphins do this offseason to convince me that they are not going to be the same old Dolphins? And the answer is nothing. Short of finding some miraculous trade to bring in Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes and reshape the whole franchise, which is not going to happen. There's nothing that this team can do, because nothing that this team does, they could have an offseason that I literally love every single thing that they do. And I could say, this was an amazing offseason. It doesn't matter, because until they show me that they're going to win big games on the road in November, December, and January, until they win at least a playoff game, I have no reason to believe that they're not going to be the same old Dolphins. So the answer is nothing.
Yeah, they have to. The thing that will convince you that they're not going to be the same old Dolphins is them going out and actually not being the same old Dolphins.
Right, which we won't know until December. This team could start 8-0, and we could be very excited. And it still doesn't necessarily mean that they're not the same old Dolphins, because it will not have meant a thing if they don't finish it.
Right. That's the whole thing. So here's the deal. Brain, we've got a couple more questions left that I want to get to. We've got an interesting question about the scouting department and Chris Grier, and we also have a reality TV type question. But to get to those questions, I think I'm going to save them, and we're going to put them on the bonus segment, which we're going to do right after this. So I'm going to remind everybody who's watching right now to, first off, smash the like button if you're watching on the DolphinsTalk YouTube video. It's that thumbs up button right below the video. Go ahead, smash that, hit a thumbs up. Thank you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that. Make sure you visit caneswear.com and get yourself some new Miami Dolphins merch. And then I want you to go over to patreon.com and sign up for as little as $3 a month. Okay, you're going to get access to the bonus segment that we're about to do. You're going to get access to our Discord server with all the chat that we're doing over there. And we got a lot of conversations going on constantly over there. And then you get access to all the other great content that's going to be coming your way, including exclusive episodes of the Same Old Dolphin Show in the offseason. Get some extra draft content, all kinds of other good stuff coming your way. And then we've got all the off-topic stuff as well. Lots more stuff from me and the Brain, lots of stuff from Mike. And there is even talk that DolphinsTalk Tom is going to come into a pro wrestling show on the Patreon over the weekend, because I guess the Royal Rumble is this weekend. And Tom may be there talking about that as well. So join up. That's once again for all of you. That is at patreon.com/DolphinsTalk. Sign up if you haven't yet. We hope that you will. We will be back Again, I'm not sure next week whether we're going to be back on the main show or just on the Patreon, but we will be doing a show next week. We'll look ahead to the Super Bowl. We'll look ahead to whatever Miami Dolphins news. Hopefully, we're not talking about speculating about who the next defensive coordinator of the Dolphins is going to be, as it sounds like right now, Anthony Weaver is one of the 2 finalists for the Saints job, so we're going to keep an eye out on that. But we'll have you covered no matter what here on the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, go Dolphins!
Whoop, whoop.